is Corey Hutchins. I'm a staff writer at the Free Times here in Columbia. Blog at the Huffington Post and contribute to the Nation magazine and contributed to the Daily Caller, CBS, and just finished up a project with the Center for Public Integrity called the State Integrity Investigation, which we just launched March 19th. Probably missing side, contribute to the Charleston City paper here in South Carolina as well, and hopefully some other outlets this year. You know, it's funny, I went and saw an investigative journalist speak here at the law school the other day, and one of the things he said was all reporting should be investigative. So, you know, my job title, I think when I got hired, it was, my official job title is staff writer. You know, on the contract it said something like, be the paper's primary investigative journalist. It's not really like a title that I use or throw around. I guess I'd go with what the guy said. You know, I think that all, or at least a lot of journalism should be investigative. I mean, you really should have to kind of do some research into what you're writing about, as much as you can. It's kind of, it's hard to say. Clearly, I think the one that had the most impact would be a story I wrote about the Lieutenant Governor, Ken Ard. This guy got elected last year from Florence County. He was not very well known. His name was Ken Ard. He was a councilman in a small county, Florence, and he won a four-way Republican primary, and he beat his Democratic opponent, who was a lawyer in Charleston, by I think under 10 percentage points. And when he came into office, I got a tip from somebody who worked on his opponent's campaign, saying you ought to take a look into Ken Ard's campaign filings. It looks like he's might be involved in some illegal activity here. And the email I got was also sent to half a dozen other reporters in the state, and I kind of just thought, like, oh well, I'm sure somebody's going to write about this. But I started looking into it that day, and called the source back and said, hey, do you know if anybody else is on this? And he said, no, you're the only one to really get back to me on it. If you need a comment, I'll give it to you. If you want comments from Democrats, let me know. In the meantime, I'd called the Lieutenant Governor about it, and he called me back, and I recorded the phone call, and he basically admitted that he had put a lot of money into his campaign and was trying to get it back. Well, that's not legal. It is in some ways. You can loan your campaign money and take back something like $25,000, but he'd spent something like $25,000 on things like flat screen TV, iPods, iPads, football tickets, leisure vacations, dinners, clothes for his wife, and stuff like that. And it ended up, and he said, no, I'm not living off my campaign funds to me, but he did say that put a lot of money in my campaign. I'm trying to get a lot of money back. And I got a quote from the ethics attorney in the state who said pretty much, yeah, this is problematic, and published the story. And knew it was going to be a big deal. I didn't know it was going to be how much of a big deal it was going to be. And the next day, the Associated Press tracked him down and asked him about the report in Free Times. And he basically said, I don't know where that reporter got those comments from. They were incredibly misconstrued. He made it sound like I was a liar. It's kind of funny. When I read it, it was my birthday. The Lieutenant Governor called me a liar. So, and I knew I had it all on tape. And I just kind of waited a few days and wondered if he'd walk it back as more reporters started asking about it, and he didn't. And so we published the recording online, and after that, the Ethics Commission looked into it and popped him with 106 ethics violations. The Attorney General, and then sent it over to the Attorney General, who did a criminal investigation into the matter, and a year later indicted him on 7 counts of public corruption. It forced him from office, and now we have a new Lieutenant Governor. So, I mean, when it comes to impact, that's clearly a story that made a lot of impact, but it's not something that I would consider fun. A really fun story, though, was covering Alvin Green's campaign in 2010 who was the guy who was living in his father's basement. He'd been kicked out of the military. He was unemployed. He had a pending federal pornography charge and did not campaign, and yet won the Democratic primary by a landslide, and no one knew how he did it, to run against Jim DeMint. And the guy was a train wreck, and it was just hilarious. I mean, every day something would happen, and every time we'd write about Alvin Green, it would get picked up, and it would be on CNN, it would be on MSNBC. You know, every time the guy opened his mouth and said something, it was newsworthy for whatever reason, because it was just so insane, so crazy. And that was just a really wild ride, and I enjoyed it. And actually, a friend of mine who publishes graphic novels for a living, his name's David Axe, he asked me if I would ever consider writing a graphic novel about Alvin Green, and we teamed up to do it with an artist that is coming out in a couple months, or coming out pretty soon, this spring, maybe next month. It's called The Accidental Candidate. It's a graphic novel about Alvin Green, so that'll be fun. I'll be interested to see what the reaction is. Yeah, everyone was calling. Reporters were calling me. Bloggers were calling, asking, like, what do you have to say? Basically just called you a liar. What do you have to say? And I remember at the time just thinking, like, well, I've got it. And I said, well, I'm just waiting to see what else the lieutenant governor has to say. And after a few days, I then really thought, like, well, what we should really do is put it out there and say, look, he has raised questions about our, the reporter's credibility, the paper's credibility. Let's put it out there. And we put it out on Free Times and cross-posted it with the Huffington Post. And, it was a strategic move, and it paid off. It worked. Free Times is like, with a weekly newspaper, I think you want to be about 50-50, 50% content, 50% advertising. We have 4 editorial staffers. I cover the State House and national politics, things like that. We have Eva, who is the news editor, and she writes about the city, covers local elections and stuff like that, and food as well. And Pat Wall is our music and entertainment editor and reporter. And then Dan Cook is our editor, covers it, deals with arts and edits everything. And that's one side of the building, and then the rest is all sales. And then we have designers. And you want to make, like I said, you want it to be about 50-50. So, yeah, all of our revenue comes from display advertising, whether it's in the newspaper itself or online. And that's why we can give it away for free.
Right. And then I know, like, a lot of times you'll have, like, special ones, like, around back-to-school time, around, like, St. Patrick's Day was a big one.
Mm-hmm. We do a health issue every year.
You get, like, a real big uptick in, like, people who want to advertise around times like that when you're doing a special one, or?
Sure, yeah, absolutely. I think that's why we do it.
And then, does anything extra go into, like, do you do anything extra for stuff like that? Like
yeah, we do special sections and we do special themed issues. So the St. Patrick's Day one was really just a big cover story. The health issue is something we started this year that we're going to do every year, and that itself is also it's like just like a big cover story. We do a big cover package about health and wellness and stuff like that. I can't think of some other special sections that we'll have. I'm sure there will be some, but just staff writers do that. We hire freelancers to do it, and we're gonna we probably do one a month. It was I won Journalist of the Year. It was the first time that anyone from Free Times has won it, but I won it in the weekly division. I don't know if anybody from an alt weekly has won it before. Going to the Press Association banquet a couple weeks ago to accept it. I mean, you're in a room with every weekly journalist, state pretty much, who got an award, and it's a pretty big. It's at a hotel on Folly Beach, and I mean it was packed. There's a lot of weekly papers, but they're not all like Free Times is an alt weekly, but a lot of papers in South Carolina come out every week, but I'm trying to think of some like the Clinton Chronicle. It's a pretty small newspaper that you might not have ever heard of before. But they actually just broke a story, which I thought was awesome, a couple weeks ago about like some county Republican party in Lawrence County, South Carolina, wanting to do a purity pledge where if you wanted to run as a Republican, you had to promise that you never had sex before you were married, and that you would never look at porn ever in your life. And it was pretty neat. I read, somebody tweeted it on Twitter, and it was a story I never would have read. And I think this kind of goes to show the power of social media these days. But so I read it on Twitter, and this is great, and pitched an idea, a post to my editor of the Huffington Post. It was like on a Sunday. And said, hey, I think this would be national news if we wrote about it. She said, yeah, go for it. And the next day, on my Google News, there were like 107 stories about it. And I think the chairman resigned, and the guy, I talked to the reporter who wrote the original story, and he was like, man, we've never had so many hits to our website before. And that's pretty cool, just to see that, like, how a small paper like that can actually reap the benefits from what I call the monster media, which is like news aggregators like the Huffington Post, BuzzFeed, those kind of large media companies that are based in Washington, D.C. or New York City or California that kind of feed off the content, pretty much content farmers really, feeding off the content of local papers. But, that can come around and turn into ad revenue for that paper if they do it. And I actually called the publisher and asked him about it, and he said, yeah, it might not have paid off just yet, but we sure as hell are going to try to make it. Yeah, that's tough. Sometimes, like during the election, it's hard but fun. I mean, during the election, it was pretty easy because there's just stories everywhere, and there's always a different angle you can look at a story that an editor at one magazine might like or one publication might like. With the Huffington Post, it's great because I can write a HuffPost story based off a story I'd already published in Free Times, and that helps everybody. It gets, the Huffington Post has millions of viewers every day, and they drive traffic to the Free Times, website, which blows up our stats, and we can sell more ads based on it. And then, if I interview somebody, for a small story that I'm working on, just for a 800, 700 word piece in the government section, and I think it's something that can work as a cover, or like a longer expanded narrative story, and we are kind of like geared up on all our cover packages, then I can, say, all right, well, I'll pitch it to this magazine or something like that. And for the project I did with the Center for Public Integrity, they had hired a newspaper reporter in all 50 states, all 50 state capitals, and they just put out like a blanket application process, and I really never even thought I would be considered. And I sent my resume, and they said, yeah, we'd love to have you do it. And it took 18 months, and we released it, and it was a risk analysis of corruption in all 50 state governments. And it was tough. I mean, it took a long time. I had to do a ton of interviews, so it was like a lot of lunches. Like I'd take my lunch break and do 3 interviews if I could. But that was something that I had to answer like 330 questions and have 2 different sources on. And that was one. I remember thinking when I originally took it on, like if I looked at how much work I was going to have to do. And I remember thinking at the time, like, if I can never do this. And I just thought, if I finish this, like, if I actually get this done, I feel like I can do anything. And at the end, it was pretty cool to see it pay off. I went to college in New York at Morrisville State College, and it was a 4-year school, but the journalism program was only 2 years. So you get an AAS degree or something like that, an associate's degree. And so I came to USC in 2002 and studied journalism here, and then switched my major at the very end to English so I could get out early. So I have a journalism degree and a degree in literature. Yeah, I wrote for the Gamecock, and actually in my last year at USC, was freelancing for a crime and justice weekly paper called Snitch. I think that was only around for a year or so, and it really just covered crime. I wrote like a 2-page double truck crime blotter every week, and it did feature stories about cops, crime, and then I went on vacation to Europe over a summer, and while over there, I remember being in an internet cafe in Amsterdam, and I got an email from one of the guys who worked at Snitch, and he said, hey, you know, the publication's going under. When you come back, it's probably not going to exist, but this was the ad director, and he said, I'm going to start my own paper, and would love to have you, like, co-found it with me. It's something you'd be interested in. I was a senior in college. I was 22 or 3. And I wasn't sure if I really, you know, would want to take on that kind of responsibility, but I know it would be such a great opportunity. And when I came back to the United States, he had basically set it up, and we started what we called the Columbia City paper. And I worked there for about 2.5 years. And then it was maybe 4 or 5 of us. We had an office above Groucho's. It was a lot of fun. And in the meantime, I worked at bars and restaurants, you know, to pay the bills, because we were not making any money. And any money we did make went back into the business. And eventually we all kind of got sick of each other. And the publisher now lives in Vietnam. He left the country. The other guy that I worked with there got sued after I sold my shares from the paper. The business got sued for libel and actually went to court here and lost a $40,000 court case for libeling somebody. And they're appealing it, and it might even go to the state Supreme Court here. It's actually, ironically, a story I wrote about in Free Times a couple weeks ago. It all came full circle. But shortly after that, in 2008, I started freelancing for Free Times, and I started full-time a couple years ago. Find out what you really want to do early. And I know that's tough because I didn't know what I really wanted to do. I didn't know, I cover politics now. And if you told me, if the guy I was in college came down this hallway and I told him, hey, you know, you're going to be covering politics in South Carolina for a living, I'd tell him there's no way, no way. But, so that was something that I kind of feel like I fell into, but I really enjoy it. So, while I said, find out what you want to do early, if you want to, I knew I wanted to write, and I knew I wanted to be a reporter, I wanted to be a journalist, and I didn't necessarily want to take the prescribed path that, teachers tell you, professors tell you to do. I didn't go directly out of college and get an internship, although a lot of people that I know who did do that did go on to get great jobs, and I know that does pay off, but you don't have to do that. You can do your own thing, and part of me thinks maybe I just got lucky, and the other part of me thinks no, maybe I just made all the right decisions at the right time. But I think if you just know what you want to do and you just keep doing it, if you work hard at it and you know you have talent, then I think you'll be able to do what you want to do. Our lawyer is one of the best First Amendment lawyers in the country, Jay Bender, right? He teaches here.
Yes.
He'll tell you, just like you learn in class, that the best defense against truth is against libel is truth, and if you're telling the truth, then you have nothing to worry about. But you did raise a good question with anonymous sources.
Yes.
If anonymous source tells me something, I'm not going to write it as fact, unless I can independently confirm it and check it out. And that's really how people get into trouble. We had something happen. The reason I couldn't be here last week was because there were all these questions, rumors, speculation, allegations, conjecture, whatever you want to call it, swirling around the governor that she was going, that her or her father was going to be indicted. And, this came after the lieutenant governor was just indicted, and a document from the IRS got leaked out to the press showing that a Sikh temple related to the governor's father was at one point, it seemed, under investigation from the IRS, and it all came to a head toward the end of the week, and every reporter in the state was getting phone calls and having sources who they generally find credible telling them, hey, I think someone's going to get indicted. It might be the governor, it might be your father. And a blogger from the Palmetto Public Record, Logan Smith, I know him, he's a friend of mine, he wrote on his blog that Haley indictment imminent, ? Stay tuned. And he quoted two anonymous sources saying that they expect the governor to be indicted as early as this week. And it just started a shitstorm. And then the governor denied it, and then produced a letter to the Post and Courier that showed that the temple was not under investigation, or at least it had. If it was the investigation was closed, and it kind of just threw water onto this fire. But that raises a question. Could he get in trouble for doing that? No other paper did it. But I asked the dean of the journalism department what he thought about it for a story this week in Free Times, Dean Bierbauer, and he said, well, this kind of thing's going to keep happening because the environment fosters this kind of thing. And with this new media culture, he likened it to the Wild West, with what blogs can do online these days, pretty much anything. And there's no code of conduct really governing it. And there's always a threat of a lawsuit. So you just got to make sure that what you're doing is true. What you're saying is true. Really, the sources will most of the time say, can you keep me anonymous? And we'll only do that if there's a real reason to. There's got to be a compelling reason why you don't want to put your name behind this. Is it because you work for a large corporation and you're telling me about the internal operation of this corporation, which is illegal, like say a whistleblower or something like that? Clearly this person's going to, or they work in a state agency, this person's going to lose their job if we out them. But a lot of times with anonymous sources, they'll give you a tip and they'll tell you something, and you can independently verify it. You can file a Freedom of Information Act request with an agency and get the documents they point you to, and you never even have to use their name or anything they said. But if they're quoting anonymous sources saying things, there's got to be a compelling reason to do so, to keep their name out of it. And usually what we'll say is, we'll protect you. If what you're saying is true and we can verify it, we're not going to say who you are, even if we have to go to court. It's reporters have been on trial and been asked to give up their sources before, but I think you're protected from that. But there should be a pretty good there should be a compelling reason why you're protecting somebody.